a two-story space, bringing daylight into that area. That also brings daylight into the flexible learning spaces. And a view of the cafeteria, and this is probably the muddiest space in the building. So this is a little bit different perspective, but you can see a lot of natural daylight. That's directly adjacent to the bus entry for the building, as well as the access to the recess areas down to the south part of the site. I'm going to pause there to see if there's any questions I can answer on the design aspect before Will starts in on the construction.
Board members have any questions? Director Kelleher?
Hello. So always fun to see the building happening. I know you talked about the design process and stuff. As we have been retrofitting our existing buildings with safety and security, I know that's been part of this design process. You want to talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
that?
I neglected to mention that as we were going through,
Yep.
but in your previous referenda, you instituted a lot of security changes. We were actually the design architect coordinating all of that, so we were able to make sure that all of those standards are within this building as well, and it matches not only what you've put in place, but also set some standards for what you're going to be doing in the future. So that's all included in this.
Yep. So these are fully secured like the buildings that we've been retrofitting.
Exactly.
So, and then the other piece to that is you talked about the design process and the pre-planning. You know, that's the official pre-planning that was done, but I know we've always leaned on our subject matter experts to help us do the informal pre-planning and stuff like that. And can you just touch a little bit on what that process is that this district has adopted that's worked very well? Because we know we have more coming down the pike.
Absolutely. From a pre-planning process, you've always been in sort of that growth scenario mode from a district, and so a lot of enrollment projections on a regular basis, as well as running annual capacity analysis for the buildings. The number of students a building holds can change year to year based on how you're using different spaces. At the elementary level, you're typically counting classrooms versus the secondary buildings. You're looking at the number of teaching spaces as well as how they're scheduled out. More special education spaces, for example, will lower the overall capacity of a building in terms of that use. So we look at where the buildings stand in terms of capacity compared to those projections so that you can determine with enough time, it looks like based on our growth, we may need a building here. From there, we work with district administration to look at grade configuration as well as where students might be coming, look at potential sites if they're available at that time to determine here's some different scenarios that you might consider in terms of options for your buildings and what might be needed for the future. Big example of that was when you went from junior highs to middle schools and adding that secondary high school. That was a major shift in terms of organizational structure. Other ones have been more, depending on what's happening, we may be able to use additions at the buildings now to anticipate needing a new building at this point in the future. And so it is an annual process for review, but as you get further and further into it, and we know that you're leading towards potential referenda, decision dates, that's when we really start working with, given the process for review and comment, Department of Education submittals, et cetera, here's a timeline that you may want to look at for making decisions to ensure that you have not only the decisions made, but enough time as a board to discuss that, bring that to the community, and plan an appropriate referenda. So,
And is that fair to say that that part of it is 10 months out, a year out?
it can be, especially if you're needing to find sites. Sites are not always easy to find. Some of it is master plan, and you can take a look at what work you've done as a district in terms of master planning and saying, we've known this has been the plan, or if it's larger than that, it may require more discussion time. And so it really comes down to, as a board, how much consideration time you want to feel to not be behind the 8 ball in terms of making those decisions.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Great. I'll invite Will up.
Good evening, Madam Chair, Directors. Thanks for having us. As Vaughn showed you with some images, it's quite an exciting time out there. The school's starting to take shape. If you drive by, it's starting to look like the renderings that we've been focusing on for about a year now as this design has kind of progressed, developed, and we've worked through the process. I'm here representing Loeffler Construction and Consulting. We're the construction manager's advisor for the district on the project. My role was focused really heavily in pre-construction portion of this, and now I'm providing kind of a management level oversight of the project Our project manager, Cam McDowell, is here. He's working on the day-to-day stuff, and our general superintendent, Conrad Hoig, is in the field every day addressing things as they come up. I point that out because it's the same team that we've had since our first project with the district at Cherryview when they did the addition there. So we've had a good cohesive team working with the district on the district standards, good familiar relationship with everybody involved. Our primary role is construction technical, guiding the team through pre-planning, budgeting, scheduling, bidding, contracting, all the way to the daily grind on the construction site and making sure that we are staying on schedule and working within the budget that we have. Almost immediately, once the project got funded in the referendum in May 2021, we started hearing about some pretty serious headwinds in the material procurement and construction inflation market in construction. It started to get real loud. We ran into some 1 year plus lead times for the structural components that were going to be required for the building. We got to be able to hit the sequence. Once we start, all the material needs to arrive in a timely manner so we can get it erected, put in place, and keep things moving. We did this on our project here with a series of bid packages. Bid package A was structural steel, joist, deck, and the precast storm shelter. Those materials were bid in May, under contract in June, and the lead time actually came down a little bit. They were delivered to the site in January and February and put in place in that construction sequence. Shortly after that, we kept working with the design team to make sure we could keep going and meeting schedule. We bid out the civil component of it that allowed us to get started in the late summer of 2022 with our site work. Which is critical this time of year because we got a good start last fall. We got our utilities in place, the parking area is roughed in, the stone down, so we have area to lay down materials for things as simple as parking when we're out there. Really nice to have those lots in and get all that civil work done. And then our final bid package was C, and that was the remaining structural, architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing scopes. And that completed our bid process and kind of got all of our prime contractors on board. Just a couple highlights from construction timeline here. Like I said, we got started in August, and it was warm, and it was sunny, and it was dry last year, and we were able to work deep into the fall, getting the foundations installed, the parking lots, like I mentioned, all the way up into December. We were doing work on site, and then it kind of started snowing and didn't stop. But because we got
started snowing.
because we were able to work so long, we were able to get those foundations down. That's a really temperature sensitive work. The steel erectors and precast contractors, they can work when it's 10 degrees or 100 degrees. They're not as dependent on the weather. So a couple milestones there. There's a nice run of footing that's about to get poured in late September. Skip down one slide here. It's a little sensitive. There's the footing after it gets poured. The white pipes in the foreground on the picture on the right is the kitchen area. The large concrete wall in the back is some of that design with having the entrance up high and our site constraint walking out down low. That's the big retaining wall that kind of forms our almost walkout elementary school here. Here we are in those cold months. Like I mentioned, it's a dreary picture in the middle of January, but it was a good day for our team. Like I mentioned, the design team, the construction manager, district, we were all worried about these lead times for a long time, and to be able to coordinate like we did, do those bid packages and get our materials on time, it was a great day in January when they started bringing this stuff out to the site and we got to start making a building out of it. The precast that I mentioned on the left side there, that's the really big toys with the double T roof on the storm shelter going in place. And then the picture on the right is late March, not too long ago, with the exterior cold form framing that'll make up the exterior wall of the building. It's on the north side. Upcoming milestones, we're having a good week this week. It hasn't rained in a few days, and we're getting some roof down. That's a big item for us. When the roof goes on, we consider the building dried in. It allows us to move in the rest of the trades. All of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing rough-ins can start once the roof's on. And from there, the finishes just flow through. So it'll really turn into a beehive here. The head count will go up considerably, and we'll be putting a lot of work in place for the next 6 months or so as we continue working. Schedule-wise, we're on time for the spring 2024 date that Vaughn kind of mentioned. That's been the target. Give the district some time to move in for the planned opening in the fall. Project budget, like we mentioned, a lot of pre-planning in October through December of 2020. When it came time to prepare the review and comment for the state of Minnesota, we landed on the numbers you see there at the top of the screen. The design team, district, we worked with looking at 5 comparable elementary schools that had been built in the recent past at that time. We were dealing with some pretty favorable market conditions. And then, like I previously mentioned, the construction costs and the inflation really started to take off in 2021, put a lot of pressure on our project team to stay on budget and really keep an eye on value for the district. Through those design phases that Vaughn mentioned, schematic, design development, construction documents, we did budget updates at all those intervals, plus after each bid package. And we saw that construction cost increases at almost every interval. Like I mentioned, the value engineering, it was considered the whole time. The project scope was always in consideration as we were aware of the referendum target and where we wanted to be. There is a lot of meetings, a lot of effort, some in this room and some in other areas around here, on just focusing on how we can be efficient and how we can get the program that was promised to the voters built to the district standards for the most reasonable price. Notable design modifications, it wasn't even really modifying the design, because we started to track some of these trends early in the process. We were kind of constantly evaluating how we could consolidate the building program, get that program in a tight square footage, be efficient with our building system selection, work through the site design and grading and the new 185th and Highview, or the new 185th and Huntley that's on the west side, to make sure everything was tying out and working together. And then when it did come to our final specifications, we were careful, and we targeted areas where we could get some good, keep that strong life cycle, that durability, that quality that the district buildings have for an efficient price. So through the process, we were able to maintain those quality standards, the longevity that the district plans, and then security that is present in all the other buildings. Currently, we're tracking a budget of $46.4 million, and it's 28% complete with all of our bid results. Everything's out for contract, and we're working our way through the process. This did trend a little bit over the referendum amount, and the primary drivers with that were the construction inflation that we saw that was 15 to 20% depending on some of the indices, as well as the site development. The district got to partake in sharing some costs for the new roads that are going to serve the school, as well as the utility connections to get that greenfield site ready for a building. Happy to report that at this point in the process, we're confident that the budget that we have will take us the rest of the way. We've got a good, healthy contingency. Our team is continuing to pursue cost-saving ideas as we go here to ensure that we're being responsible and getting good value for the district. One more slide here for Bill, but I can stand for any questions that you might have as well.
Any board members have any questions? Director Kelleher?
I'm just curious, with the interior work and some of the other finishes and stuff you're going to be getting into shortly, how is the supply chain looking for those products?
It looks good, and it's a big relief to say, because it has been 18 months to 2 years of just constantly fighting it. I mean, construction was about just-in-time inventory, just-in-time delivery for a long time, and we've really switched to, if you can get it to us, ship it, we'll find somewhere to put it. So we are looking good. We're not seeing any major procurement challenges. The one that snuck up a little bit late last year was electrical switchgear, the switchboards, the main electrical kind of heart to the building, and we were able to procure that, and we got it coming. It's going to be a little bit late, but won't affect our construction sequence.
Good.
Any additional questions from the board? Director Thompson?
Hey, thanks for this overview. I see that we've got the $46 million in the current budget. What happens when we go over, and where does that funding coming from?
We have a slide for that, and Bill, I think I can let you take this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, we have one more slide where we'll talk about our budget and where we've found the funds to bring us enough funds to get to the budget that we need. Back to Director Thompson's question. The budget that's in place right now, those are all contracts already in place. So we don't foresee any type of cost coming forward that would increase that budget. And we at this point also have a very healthy contingency fund. So if there is some pieces that come forward, we have money to cover quite a few pieces if we really had to. But the way it's been going so far, we haven't saw any overruns. It's come out very well, besides the increase in the inflation on the front end. So as Will said earlier, when we started, the bond issue funds that we had available to do this project was $39.85 million after we did the actual bond sale. The good news, or I should say what, I've had past superintendents, they say, go vacuum up the money because we got to add some money for whatever we need it for. So we went and looked at all the pieces that we could pull together to put into this project. So for starters, we did have savings from what we budgeted for the land sale at $550,000. So of course, that's available for this project. If you remember last fall, we had some unused bonding authority that we went ahead and used to find funds to put into this project. That was at $2.35 million after we did that bond sale. Taking some future capital funds and allocating it to this building. So we're allocating funds out of our capital area, both in '24 and in '25 to find $2 million. After we finished our other projects, we did have $800,000 in different contingencies out of different projects that we pulled together to put into here. If you remember, student nutrition's had a pretty healthy fund balance, and we were using funds from their fund balance on equipment in that kitchen. So that's $350,000. And then, of course, we have estimated interest that we're going to collect on the funds that are still in our bank. So we certainly haven't spent all the funds yet at about $500,000, and that's on track to get up to $500,000. So yes, the budget is definitely higher. We definitely had some inflation to take care of, but we really wanted to be very, very careful not to lower the standard of our building. So we found the funds we could in order to keep going with the project that we had. Yeah, I think that's all we have. So any questions on that?
Any questions from board members? Director Thompson?
So can you share with me the contingency amount? So let's say there was a contingency, we have $1 million in our contingency, or the $500,000. We went over almost $3 million, obviously, than what we were anticipating. But from there, if we don't use that contingency money, is that something that can be reallocated back to our general fund?
Oh, no, we cannot take any of these funds to put into our general fund. If there are remaining funds from the contingency, when we get to the end, they will be held aside for any future projects that we bring forward.
And how much have you allocated towards contingency?
Right now, I think the contingency is at 730, is that correct? 730? Oh, $750,000 is in the contingency at this point in time.
Any other questions from board members? All right. Thank you so much. It was really exciting to hear about this.
Thank you.
All right, so our next item on the agenda would be reports with recommended actions. So we'll go through these one item at a time. We'll start with the transportation contract. Bill, I think that's you again.
Yes, it is. I'm trying to figure out which one of these are, I think it's this one. Yes, here we go. Tonight, I'm bringing forward a transportation contract for you. We have Mike Forborg from Schmidt and Sons here, along with Dave Moore. They do all the work with our transportation, and they do a very good job. So I appreciate what they do for us on a daily basis. So just to briefly look at this contract and the pieces to it. First of all, it does expire this June 30th, so we have to go forward with a new contract. We put out an RFP back in February to look for any interest into this service. We did receive interest from 7 different contractors, so we were pleased with that. But when the day came to actually receive the proposals, we only received one proposal, and it was from Schmidt and Sons, our current provider. One thing the state has done for school districts has allowed us to go a lot longer period on our transportation contracts. They used to be only 2 years at a time, and it did make it kind of difficult. We can now go 10 years on a transportation contract. So what we're bringing forward tonight is a 5-year contract with the ability to renew it for 5 more years with negotiation on the service fees. So for this next year, the new route rate's at $414. This is right in line with other contracts, other school districts in the metro area. So it's not out of line with what other districts are paying. In year 2 through 5, we have a 3% increase built into the contract, along with a CPI. So if we saw some big increases in our inflation like we have in the last 2 years, there was a CPI up to 6%, but not over 6%. So it'll run somewhere between the 3 and the 6, depending on what that CPI is. And that's something else that's common now in new contracts. I'm not saying most, I didn't count them all, but many contracts now have a CPI escalator in it as we go through each year. I think that's all I have. So in your board packet, I did include the rate sheet for all the different pieces that we pay for. And of course, that increase just goes on to every one of those fees as we go through each year. So any questions on that? Otherwise, I just need a motion to accept.
Any questions from board members on the transportation contract?
One quick one.
Director David Anderson?
What are we paying now for the route rate?
I didn't bring that number, I'm sorry. I'm thinking 380.
I'm not trying to blindside.
You remember what it is? 379.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to accept the contract.
So we have a motion by Director Kelleher to accept the transportation contract. Do we have a second?
I second.
Second by Director Schendley. We'll open it up for discussion. Okay. Director Thompson?
Yeah, hey, Mr. Holmgren, can you share with me what was the district's point of view on the 3%? And I asked just because our state income is usually a 2% increase historically, and then when I see the 3% increase for the next 5 years, that's 1% more, and it's going to continue to compound annually. So just would like to know more. I'm assuming that would reduce our overall budget as a whole. So just looking to understand.
Yes, Director Thompson, you're right. We'll be talking about budget here a little later tonight, but we do expect future years to be around 2% from the state of Minnesota. In this case, we didn't have a lot of bargaining power because they were the only one who came in and quoted or bid on this project. So to accept that, we really have no option not to accept.
We don't have a choice.
We don't have any choice because we have to have somebody transport our students. I did talk to some of the other interested parties, why didn't you give us a proposal? And it was the large volume and the cost and trying to procure buses. They just couldn't get it done. So that's the reasons. Of course, we're certainly happy with the service we get from Schmidt, but yes, this is a little higher than we have had in the last few years.
And I think people don't realize how vast the district is. You know, we go from Scott to Dakota County and
86 square miles.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. Director Keller?
But in addition to the fact that, yes, that may be a 3% increase and the state is showing or talking about a 2% increase, thinking about it from our vendor partners' position, we also know that labor costs, fuel costs, utility costs, and everything else are going up much more than 3%. So to me, that is a fair a fair assessment for us to absorb, especially when you talk about, I don't know if we still, but I mean, the quality of service and support that we get is really second to none. And they know our students, and when you ask kids about who their favorite teacher is and they tell you the bus driver, you know, it's like they're an extension of our district.
And just to make a note of that, we did have 2 bus drivers that won the Inclusion Award this year because the kids really relate to our drivers. So
Our drivers relate to our kids,
Yes,
so they are an
yeah.
extension of us. So
Yep.
I understand the honestly, when you talk about the state dollars and what they give us for increases, they never give us enough to cover what the natural transition is with costs. So that's a hard one to stay within because it just doesn't really exist in today's environment.
Right. Dr. Van Zyl?
I would agree. You have to also take a look, like, for example, insurance. We just approved insurance, health insurance. That was 5%. So, you know, it's very hard when you have contracted services to be able to stay within whatever the state's going to tell us to do. But we also work with our partners, and they try to provide us the best that they can. You know, we went to them and said, sharpen your pencils as much as you can. So it's not like we feel like they're gouging us or doing anything to that. Plus, I think the services they provide, as many of you mentioned. Yeah, we wish everybody were able to stay to whatever the state gave us as new money, but we don't have that flexibility or that luxury. But it would make budgeting a lot easier for us if that were to be the case.
All right, Director Thompson?
Yeah, I understand that, and I think I just want to be super clear that the transportation service is fantastic. So that I think that's not the issue. I think I just want to be mindful of that. If we're not getting more than 3% or more than 2%, how do we manage that? So 2 questions. One, is the transportation budget coming out of our general budget, and then what do we spend yearly on this?
I'm sorry, I'm not exactly hearing everything you said, but right now, the contract, we're spending a little over $8 million on a transportation on a yearly basis. When we talk about the difference between a 2 and a 3, percent, it's less than $100,000 on a yearly basis. This is pretty common in school district budgets. As we go forward, the state gives us an amount that's never seems enough, and everything else grows a little bigger. And then we get to a point where, well, we got to make some adjustments to make it all work, because we can't let it keep spreading,
Right.
Which we just went through. So it's about $100,000 difference from the 2 to the 3.
Okay. Director Kelleher?
So I think Director Thompson also asked the budget that it comes out of, the operating budget.
Yes, all transportation dollars come out of the general fund.
Yep.
They're all regular, undesignated funds for the school district.
But my question was just to finish up his bit to move on to mine. So not that I want to put Schmidt and Sons on the spot, but they've got to, if he still has in his head some of the fun facts about, we are 86 square miles school district. Do you have the numbers in your head about how many miles you cover in a day?
I think the fun fact that we brought to the board in previous sessions was it's like traveling to Alaska and back.
Each day, traveling to Alaska and back each day.
8,000 miles a school day.
8,000 miles a school day. So when we're talking about that budget, that's a lot of ground to cover.
Dr. Van Zyl?
The other thing I think that you also have to remember is that we run a very unique tiered system in our district for efficiency as compared to most districts.
Yep.
We run a 4-tier system, 4 tiers, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
For most districts, probably run a single or a double tier. So we're already trying to run as efficiently as we can. By running 4 tiers, it's fewer buses, And so you actually are more efficient as compared to having to run 100 buses. We're running 54. So, otherwise we'd be running 100 buses, and you figure that into your equation. It's a much more efficient system to run. It does mess with our start times a little bit on what we have to stagger, but it does actually save the district
lot.
a substantial amount of money.
And that used to be a 3-tier system, and we went to 4-tier. But I think it's important when we talk $8 million, that's an awful lot of money, but there's a lot of road that's being covered in that time.
Director David Anderson?
Just a quick comment. I think they do a great job, and they've done a great job with my kid over the years, so thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Director Thompson?
Hey, am I reading this correctly that there's 169 days as part of this agreement, meaning that if we don't have school 169 days, we are still responsible of funding 169 days worth?
Yeah, there's a guarantee up to 169 days a year. Next year's calendar, I believe, is 174. I believe that's correct.
I think that's right.
At the same time, if we don't have school, the state still pays us no matter we have school or not. So that's part of this thought here. And it's something we have had in the past. It's not something new in the contract.
Okay. Director Thompson?
Yeah, I do appreciate the fuel price adjustment provision. So thanks for that 50% cost relief if $30.50 per gallon of gasoline if it gets exceeded. Quick question, I'm just curious to know, on days that we don't need transportation, do we get any fuel cost relief, almost like rollover minutes for gasoline that we don't use?
No, we just, no.
Contract,
The
right?
contractor pays for the fuel unless we hit that $3.50, which this past year we did. We went over $3.50, and that's when we share in that fuel cost 50%. They pay half, we pay half. We are now back below that threshold, so the contractor's paying 100% of that cost. It's built into the rate cost.
Any further questions from board members? All right, so right now we have a motion on the floor to approve and a second. Hearing no further discussion, we'll do a roll call vote.
Yes.
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 Brian Thompson?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. So the next item on the agenda is the Achievement and Integration Plan. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. I'm trying to get this out of your way. There you go.
Thank you. To lower that just a little. Good evening, Chair Baker, Vice Chair Lynn, directors, Superintendent Dr. Van Zyl, executive team members, and members in the audience. Tonight, I'm here to share with you the Achievement and Integration Plan for 2023-2026. Tonight, I will share a little history of the Equity Service Department, the purpose of the Achievement and Integration Plan, and a budget overview of 2023-2026 Achievement and Integration Plan. Equity Services has been a department in the district for the past 15 years when district became eligible for funding through the Minnesota Department of Education via the Achievement and Integration Plan, being one of the restricted sources by state of Minnesota. School districts become eligible for this Achievement and Integration funding when there is a 20% difference or more in the protected students in their district as compared to neighboring districts. 15 years ago, Burnsville schools had 20% or more students in the protected class, and we were able to join in as the adjoining district. Part of that requirement of the Achievement Integration funding is that the isolated and the adjoining districts work together towards their plan goals. Racially isolated districts work with their adjoining achievement integration districts to develop integration goals and activities for their students to participate in together. Recently, Minnesota Department of Education notified our district, and based of this year's fall data, Lakeville is now considered a racially isolated district, meaning that we are now required to create an achievement integration plan. The purpose of the Achievement Integration Plan is to pursue racial and economic integration, increase student achievement, create equitable educational opportunities, and to reduce academic disparities based on students' racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. What this graph shows is the process of a writing, getting approval for, and reporting the Achievement Integration Plan. This graph also highlights that when it comes to reporting, we're always a year behind. So I want to be clear, when I stated we had not met all of our 2023 goals, please know we will be reporting them again coming fall, and we'll present that at the World's Best Workforce presentation. So you'll be hearing this presentation again later. Finally, we wanted to show that we have a high focus on collaboration and feedback from multiple stakeholders, including community members, in order to write, carry out, and report our goals. We also communicate frequently with MDE throughout the planning and writing process. Matter of fact, as recent as of this afternoon, I did speak to MDE just because I'm constantly in contact with them, as this plan was due on March 15th. And what I heard from them was they're ready to review and support this plan. It was, I don't mean to brag, but also one of the best plans that they have seen in a long time. And they are also willing to talk to anyone if needed. When it comes to the goals, here is a summary of each of the goals for the 2023-26 Achievement Integration Plan. Once again, many teams collaborated to create these goals. We had feedback from our Equity Steering Committee, which is a group of our principals, teachers, directors, and others, staff members in our district. Our Multi-District Collaboration Council, which is an advisory group both with ISD 194 and ISD 191. That group also has stakeholders that are in our community, and then also our director, Dr. Anderson. We also got feedback from our Teaching and Learning Advisory Council, our gifted coordinators, and our MTSS team. So you can look here, Goal 1 focuses on the closing the graduation gap. Goal 2 focuses on closing our reading academic gap. Goal 3, we have data that shows we have a gap in which students are enrolling in and being successful in advanced academic programs. And so we want to see an increase of more students being in advanced academics. And our final goal focuses on building all staff capacity around cultural responsiveness. These strategies we have in place that fall under these goals are Young Scholars Specialist, scholarships for activities and enrichment, continue providing increased family engagement, and provide enrichment programming for early literacy. These are in our current plan and will continue in the 2023-26 plan. There has been questions what supports will provide in lieu of our AVID class. This portion will be spent to support more students. So we've increased stipends and substitutes for our staff to plan for next steps. More funding on transportation, as we just heard about. Expanding on our school success liaisons. I've also heard feedback on having more school success liaisons in buildings, and that is part of this new plan. And expanding our young scholars, which is another feedback that we have heard. To close the achievement gap, we have to meet kids where they're at and provide them the support that they need. We have to address the current needs for all of our students. We want all students to walk into our buildings and feel that sense of belonging, no matter who they are, and experience that academic success. That is our goal in this plan. As I've mentioned, the Achievement Integration budget is an additional, meaning these are restricted funds for our district. The majority, 80% or more of the Achievement Integration funds must be used direct student services. As you can see on this graph, we are well within that required percentage. We also need at least 20% to be split between that professional development and our administrative cost. Given our total revenue, a little bit over $1.7 million. I want to thank all of our groups of staff and community that I have mentioned earlier that have been part of this plan. They have put together a plan that we are proud of, and so is the Minnesota State Department of Education. And this time, I will leave it open for questions.
All right, we'll take some questions from the board. Director Lind?
Yes, I know we're talking about, people have been talking about Abbott is gone. And my question is, you have children in it right now, and do you feel you're going to continue to meet their needs until the next program comes in?
Correct, Director Lynn, excuse me.
Doctor's okay too.
Dr. Lynn, Director Lynn, yes. I mean, I keep saying right now, like, we are serving this many students. I want to serve this many with that funding. And so I believe that we can do that. As I mentioned last week, I have other directors that are going to be working with me, Director Elida Kane and Director Megan Blazik, who are very much involved and will be part of that process just as much as I will be inviting our Avid staff.
So the hope is to increase numbers, expand the school success liaison, which was an important part of Avid. I don't know if you knows that or not. And expanding the young scholars, which makes sense, and providing money so that a lot of these things that they were doing after school, more kids can do after school because they can ride a bus.
Exactly. And I have, like I said, provided more funding around that transportation piece.
Okay. And then next year coming with a modified plan? Okay.
Yes. That is our hope.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Director Carly Anderson?
Thank you for the overview. So with the money so if Avid is canceled, and I understand there's a planning phase, and I heard you say increased stipends and things like that. So I guess, as Director Lynn is pointing out, I think the major concern I've heard is what about all the Avid 11, Avid 10, those students who are in there now, and what's going to be there for them next year. And so we can expect a modified plan, but also do we need this off year from a financial perspective in order to do the planning? Does my question make sense?
Do we need an off?
Well, so if we cut Avid, there's a big expense that goes with Avid that would go back into the fund. And so I heard you say you're increasing stipends and things like that. So for those who are involved in Avid right now, they would be part of that planning process for the following year.
If they'd like to.
If they elect to. So we need that money for planning purposes.
Correct, yes. And that's why I did put an increase in the stipends and then also for substitutes. If they need substitutes, if we are pulling them during the day, I like to make sure that that funding is through the A&I plan for the substitutes. And then also if it's after school, if we're meeting after school, I want to provide that stipend opportunity for our staff.
And then when can, sorry, can I ask?
Go for it.
When can we, with a modified plan for next year, when might we know what that looks like? Because I think that's what probably all of us are sitting with is what happens to those students.
I have an email waiting right now with next steps, and so I would like to get a team going in May with those next steps, and probably have at least a draft by the end of the school year.
Director Kelleher?
But even though the name Avid's going away, from what Director Lynn said and from what I understood last week in our work session on this discussion, is this plan embeds a lot of those strategies and practices, so that training, those strategies and practices aren't going away. They're embedded and will be incorporated and are incorporated into this plan, which will be in effect. So the only piece that you're really developing now, that you're getting the Avid volunteers and stuff to help provide input in, is for how to take this and elevate it to the next level.
Exactly. Right now, we have, a class every grade level, 7th through 12th grade. The goal is to expand that. And so I know who those students are that are in Avid right now, and I will make sure that they get that support that they need next year, whatever that might look like, and then from there, expand with our other students.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just to build off that, because I do know that the students that are in it today and who have been in it from when we started this program, even though that it's been a class, and so they've had to either choose between Avid or other electives, and that dwindles as they move through the years. When they did have that class, that was a safe and comfortable space for them. So I'm just reiterating that this is it's embedded in here, and it's to take it to the next level, and working with those groups is bringing back those elements so that those students will have a place where they feel safe and comfortable and will continue to grow.
Correct. As I mentioned last week, we have over 200 staff members who have been trained around Avid strategies, and those Avid strategies are not going away. And so our hope is to continue providing those strategies in all of our classrooms and support our students.
Director David Anderson?
So just to provide some perspective, I'm so old, I was on the first Governor's Council integration that Carly's serving on now. Just so you know, I kind of know what I'm talking about. I agree with you expanding to more students, but like Director Lynn said, the big concern I have right now is especially the grade level 11 that are going to be seniors next year. So I have some fairly big reservations that we really take care of them.
And Director Anderson, I already have somebody in mind, and is somebody that's has stepped up, willing to support our 11th grade students that are current 11th grade right now, and help with some of the support that they would have continued doing their senior year.
Right. Because we've had a lot of feedback from students and teachers that they consider it like a family, and I want to keep growing that. And even the night at the public engagement, there was a past student that came and spoke,
Yeah.
So.
And I fully 100% agree with that. I want more of that. I want more of a family. I want that sense of belonging. I want every student that walks into the building to feel that.
So if they're not going to have that class this last year, what do the seniors get next year?
The support from the teacher that has offered.
Like
Just
when
with
during
the
their day,
scholarships
though?
after school.
It'd be
And
after
transportation will be provided.
Yeah.
Director Thompson?
Thank you. Hey, can you share with me how many students are impacted that are in 11th grade at North and at South?
Ooh, give me a second. I can find that out quickly.
Someone knows how to do this.
Okay, repeat that question for 12th grade currently.
No, for 11th
11th
grade. So
grade,
the
32 total.
Somebody say 11.
And so if can I make the assumption there's 15 at North and 15 at South, which is the equivalent of just one class per semester or one class throughout the whole year?
One class per year.
Go ahead, Director Thompson.
Is that a 0.2 of a class?
Correct.
Or is that a full one? Okay. So if you have
0.2.
one North and one South, that would be a total of 0.4. What is the average cost of much that FTE? Is it 80,000, Bill?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're looking at a $40,000 investment to continue 11th grade program for this from a financial perspective. I did recall you last week that we talked about Avid. The word Avid costs $30,000 to be able to use that franchise or that name. If we discontinued using the Avid name, and if we've got over 200 teachers that have Avid strategies and they know that, couldn't we offer a 0.4 class and it costs $40,000 out of the $1.7 million to finish the 11th graders through?
If we could, what I'm understanding here, if we continue having just our 11th grade next year, is that what you're asking? We would still have to pay that fee then. For Avid.
Why?
He's asking if we're not using the name and we're kind of going off our own, can we still like have the class for them so they can finish it out?
That would still. So isn't that where, aren't we taking that money though and transitioning over to substitutes so that the Avid teachers and whoever can work and plan? So that money is already being spent on the after-school program and mostly on the substitute teachers so we can plan the next year.
Yeah,
right?
it's already allocated.
Yeah, yeah, that money's already allocated.
Director Thompson?
Well, let's just unallocate it. It's $40,000. Let me ask a question. How effective is Avid?
How effective is Avid, as he asked?
With Fidelity, it is not being effective district-wide, or secondary level, I should say, 7th through 12th grade.
Director David Anderson?
I think it's not that we don't support, I think it's just the shock value, and we've always been open, open and honest with each other. I think it's just the shock value, and it's just like a company getting rid of their pension. They usually give a little time, and I think that's what we're asking.
Right, and I would agree. It's been here for 15 years, right? When we first started Avid, we were at 5% students of color. We are now close to 30%. And when it comes to strategies, sometimes we have to change some of our strategies to fit the needs. And so we did a program evaluation, and this is where we are looking at something different.
Dr. Van Zyl?
Yeah, and that was a component I was going to share, that the program's been evaluated. And one of the things that's been shared with me that hasn't been implemented necessarily with Fidelity. And the other challenges with restricted dollars, unless you're going to stop doing something with the money, you can't do something new with the money unless you're going to pay for it with general fund someplace else, and we don't have the ability to do that. So that's why they have developed a plan in which they did, so that they have the structures continuing for a majority of what they do to support kids. And as I think Lydia said, they'll continue to support the students because they're aware of them, and then they'll be able to use those dollars to work with our staff to plan what those next steps are that they are best practices, best strategies to implement and serve more kids. That's really the challenge with us, is that since it's restricted dollars, unless those dollars come from someplace else.
I understand.
But I don't know that everybody else understands that, is that I think they think you can just say, well, keep doing what you're doing, but do something different and pay people for it. Unless you had the dollars from those restricted areas, you can't do it unless you pull it out of general fund to do it.
Director Shinley?
So when you say that there's not fidelity with it, is that because we're not reaching enough kids, the amount that you wish to reach? Okay,
Yes. One is we're not full capacity in our classroom sizes first.
Okay.
Some are less than that 15 minimum, right? And then the other is around just the fidelity of not even the class. So AVID requires for us to do what's called the CCI every year, site team meetings monthly, we should be meeting, just some data requests that we have not been following.
Go ahead,
So
Director Shinley.
I think for me, my biggest concern is, and I think it's a great idea. We need to outreach to a few more for more students. Absolutely. I can't visualize what you're saying to me. I'm not familiar with AVID as maybe some here. So I guess for me, I'm trying to visualize what you're saying. Like, we want to plan, but maybe I need to see it a little bit better, like on a goals wise in that respect on paper or something like that, because I'm not understanding exactly what you're saying. And I understand the increase of substitutes and things like that, but I guess I'm not envisioning the great benefit of it. Yeah.
Looking at some of the goals, which were increasing graduation rates, increasing the NWEA scores, enrollment in advanced classes, and then the cultural responsive pedagogy with our teaching staff. One of the things that jumped right out at me was that enrollment in advanced classes, because I know they're only offered during specific times. It's really hard to get into those advanced classes as far as like just trying to get your schedule around some of them. So I think if you had to take up a class period to take an AVID class, we're kind of counterintuitive working against our goals for a specific population of students, because now we're taking that time period out where they can't enroll in that class. So that's one of the benefits that I see with having the AVID classes after school, as opposed to having it during their day, right? And granted, it won't be labeled an AVID class, but I see that as a benefit for any student in the program, because I know how difficult it is to try to schedule those classes. Director Kelleher?
Yeah, and again, I'm going to reiterate that a lot of those strategies and programs that we were doing are in this plan. And the decision to restructure and move away from AVID to incorporating it into this plan and develop the next steps to elevate the program, the AVID decision is completed and the restructuring and transition is done. So what we're working on is, do we support this plan, which supports a lot of the AVID elements and sets the foundation for the building and the program development that you're looking for.
Director Carly Anderson?
I want to add that one of the things I like that you said earlier when we talked about it was just we can create our own criteria for who is accepted into this kind of program. The one thing, so that's a huge thing, I think, that what I heard from you is because of the restrictions, that's where we're struggling to support as many students as we would like. One of the things I just think about with after school, though, I don't know how that would work just with students who are in after-school activities, or how does that, because one of the goals would be to get them in various activities, and so is there like a before-school option that could be done instead, or?
There could be if someone is willing to support that, yes, as a teacher or.
But she also said you're going to have transportation for activities
Correct.
afterward. I would just like, sorry.
No.
Go ahead and finish.
Well, and I want to acknowledge that our job is not to tell you how to do this part, but it's more that that we're considering the students, their ability to participate in something like I totally understand what you're saying about the restrictions during the day, but then after school too is, because one thing we're trying to help is after school activities, and how do we get all of our students equitable opportunities to engage in those kinds of things.
And what you will see in the budget too, we also left funding in there for tutoring during the day. So if a student can work that out in their schedule as far as during their academic seminar or whatever time that they have during the day, the school hours, I will continue to provide some of that support. So if we do have somebody in mind for before school, also during the day and then after school.
Director Lind?
My experience with Abbott has been that the teachers are totally dedicated to those kids. And when you say that you're going to meet the needs, I believe that, because it's a little different relationship between those advocates and teachers and, say, a teacher teaching math and their 10th grade class, because they change every year. A lot of these kids stay with those avid staff members and develop a good friendship. So if you're saying that you're going to meet those needs, and I'm not questioning it. If you say you're going to do it, I'm sure you will.
Thank you, Director Lynn.
Director David Anderson?
Can I just get a commitment that you're going to expand more than just transportation and scholarship help? You know, I want to support this, and I 90% support it. I want to go above and beyond to take care of those 11th graders. So please just commit to do that, and if we can help, we will do that.
Thank you. You will get my commitment on that.
Director Thompson?
Because I went to the
Sorry.
Avid graduation last year, and it was one of the best experiences, you know, I've been at, so.
Director Thompson?
So, do we need to have an accredited certified program for it to count as A&I funding?
Does it have
Did you
to
hear what
be?
he said? He's asking if we need to have an accredited certified program for it to count towards the grant to be able to get that.
No, we do not.
I think if the Department of Education approves it, we're good.
Director Thompson?
So technically, if we cancel Abbott altogether, but if we have teachers that know Abbott strategies, we give it a different name and it costs $40,000. I just feel like it seems to be a no-brainer to incorporate that.
Correct.
What? I didn't hear that.
His comment was that if we are saving $40,000 by cutting just having the Avid name, but we already have our staff trained with those strategies, then it seems like a no-brainer where we could come in and make our own criteria so we could expand the programming. Is that what you heard too? Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the board?
Can we
Director
ask,
Carly Anderson?
can we ask questions about this isn't an Avid question.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
As long as it's related to the
Integration
achievement and
plan?
integration plan, yes.
Okay. So one of the questions I asked you earlier was just based on kind of previous goals of the A&I plan, and where do you feel like you guys are at with those previous goals that maybe aren't followed up here? Does that make sense?
So yes. So one of the goals in the previous goal in the achievement integration was to hire and retain more staff of color. And as you see here, that is not one of our goals. However, it is still one of our strategies. We're working with human resources on that. We also have hired a consultant to help with that work. And so as you may not see that as a goal here, that doesn't mean that we stop the work. It's still one of those strategies that we're still working on. But that is not under the equity services umbrella. That is more of a district-wide initiative.
Director David Anderson?
And the liaisons I've known and like work with my son, the Native American liaison 5 or 6 years ago was very good. So we hire minority liaisons, right? So,
Yes. Yes, and I believe you all should have a flyer in front of you inviting you to our South of the River powwow that is happening in Burnsville. We have done that for the last few years in collaboration and partnership with ISD 191 and other districts. And so Amy, who runs is our Native American liaison, has done a phenomenal job of supporting that work and then also continuing with Culture Trunks.
Well, and I think one of the things to keep our eyes on with the current legislation is some of the Grow Your Own programs, because we do have a teacher shortage, and if we have people that are working in our district already that are qualified to work with our students, then having some of those Grow Your Own programs where we can help support that, which would also increase the representation for students in our district, and then help us with the teacher shortage as well. So those are things to keep your eyes on with the legislation.
Exactly.
Any other questions from the board? Director Shinley?
When we talk about the graduation rates, what is the disparity currently? Do you have those numbers of the graduation disparities right now and the academic?
I don't have those on me. However, I can get them. I know that the graduation rate just came out today.
Yes,
Okay.
an updated one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Director Thompson?
Yeah, I believe it was Director Anderson that said something about having more diverse teachers. I mean, I'm just looking at the Minnesota State statutes in Section 1, Subdivision 1, Section 1. It says integrated learning environments that give students improved and equitable access to effective and more diverse teachers. Like, it's literally in the statute that we need to have more diverse teachers in this program. So I'm looking at our last year's or our last integration plan from 2020 to 2023. The percentage of licensed staff of color will increase from 1.3% to 2% in 2023. I am not familiar. Are we on track towards that goal?
Are you on track for that goal?
No, we are not.
Have we increased?
We decreased.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Director Carly Anderson?
However, we're still working on it. It does fluctuate between the years.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think something, and I'll just working at the VA, this is a huge initiative in terms of how to increase representation, how to recruit and retain staff from diverse backgrounds, just to make sure our patients feel represented and things like that. So, there are instances, I'll have to send information. I mean, part of it is how do you recruit from certain universities. We also have to remember that it still starts with the culture we have in our district, and when we are so low, then it's hard to recruit people to be the standouts in the district. And so I think there are a lot of initiatives in big organizations that everybody's trying to kind of address this concern. And so if people have ideas, I think we can certainly be sharing those things.
Which is why those Grow Your Own programs are so important.
Right.
Exactly.
There's a program at Normandale where it's specifically for Black male teachers, and they're trying to develop those teachers in that college. And so how do you then try to partner with those kinds of institutions that are doing things like that?
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of those kinds of initiatives where I feel like if people in our district are hearing about those things are things they can pass along.
Correct. Dr. Van Zyl just gave me some information around Metropolitan University down in St. Paul. Also is doing the Grow Your Own and trying to recruit more staff of color. And so how can they support with bringing them in the buildings also? And it's not only the recruiting, but it's also the retaining, right? And I think the retaining piece is the piece that is hard. You mentioned it earlier, when people don't see themselves, right? Sometimes it does get tiring and uncomfortable, and they want to go somewhere else where they see more diverse population. And that goes also back to, as I mentioned with our students, we want everyone to feel that sense of belonging. And so how can we continue doing that with not only our students, but also our staff here?
Right, with special ed teachers, the retention rate, most resign within 5 years. And then if you look at our teacher education programs, enrollment in those has decreased by 80% in some areas. So it's a problem within the teaching profession, and then we compound it with some of these other issues.
Correct.
Director Carly Anderson?
Yeah, I want to make sure we think about all minoritized backgrounds, and so that's something that's super important. But it does start with the HR message of how those job descriptions are. I know I'm part of those kinds of things at the VA, where it's how do you recruit in a way that you are pulling for those kinds of applications, and then create a culture while you're interviewing, and then obviously when people are working here, and we're not going through budget cuts, hopefully. But those kinds of things that I think are just important initiatives for us to carry on with, and like I said, ideas from people.
Director Thompson?
Can you share with me how many licensed staff do you have of color?
He wanted to know how many licensed staff of color we did have.
I would have to look that up, Director Thompson.
But it's under
Isn't
2%.
that the
Yep.
less than 2%?
Yeah,
It's always been about 1.5.
1.5%.
Okay, so
You can go.
So we've got
David Anderson?
866 teachers.
The only thing that I would add is that every other district is facing the same situation that we're in, and it's not just Minnesota, it's Missouri, Iowa, any state you go to find folks of diversity that are high-quality folks that want to come to a school. They can basically write their ticket wherever they want to go. And so to what I think Director Anderson was saying is that, you have to build the climate and the culture within your community and within your school system that welcomes them, but also they're also looking for connectiveness in your community. So having been in a district that I would get some folks of diversity, but they would drive 40 miles to live someplace else because there was a community and a culture of their diversity there, that's impactful too. So it's our school district, but it's our community as well that has to be able to develop that process.
I do want to say that we have made big improvements since 2005, right? Because we were on the first equity committee together, Emily. So we have made big improvement. Is there room for improvement? Yes. But
yes.
let's be positive too. And the teachers that have been involved have done a really great job, even though they're not minority or whatever. So in liaisons, and so I was also going to ask: is the Department of Education, do they have resources or help for you to develop the plan as you go? And
Oh, yeah, they've been involved since day one, so in creating this plan.
okay.
And so they.
But in the future, they'll be there to help,
For
other than
sure.
just money.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Director Thompson?
Dr. Benzo, I totally agree with you. We do need to create a culture where, and they create an environment where folks are welcome. 20% of our students are in that protected class. So it's not like we can make an assumption that then 20% of the community is in that kind of general capacity if our student population is in that space. And just from a numbers point of view, we've got over 2,300 students that are in this protected class. And from what I'm hearing, we have like less than 10 teachers out of the 866, if that's what I'm hearing, that are part of that. And again, as I read the achievement and integration plan, like the number one directive on this list is to have access to effective and more diverse teachers. So I'd like to see more of that kind of in our plan where it makes sense. I'm not expecting our 866 teachers, 20% of them to be in that protected class diverse, but that's 173. And if we only have less than 10, that's a needle that we should probably look into.
Director Carly Anderson?
I think there's huge opportunity for a partnership with the city. And when we talk about at subsequent meetings, community engagement, to me, that's such a good place to start because yes, our student population is changing, our population here is changing. If we're not actually as leadership connecting with the community, just in terms of, getting in the community and showing that everyone in our community matters in terms of their voice, I think those are great opportunities for us to start building from a kind of grassroots perspective.
Director David Anderson?
Yeah, so one last thing, and then I'll stop talking. So I think it's important that our kids and families really buy into this. So, please, I implore you to involve them and help them and ask us whatever you need. Okay? Thank you.
All right, well, I think we've had a lot of good discussion from the board around this. So is there a motion to approve the achievement and integration plan?
So moved.
So I have a motion by Director Lind. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Director Kelleher. Any further discussion on this? Director Thompson?
Yeah, I'm reviewing this plan, and I'd like to see more data and metrics associated to it. I mean, part of the state statute says longitudinal data is required under this paragraph in reading and mathematic assessments and key performance indicators. I'd love to know, how many kindergarten students do we have in our protected class, and what their reading skill levels are and math skill levels are compared to the non. And then what does that look like in third grade? Is it declining? Is it constantly behind? I think for me, I'd like to have more data around what is the root cause, not the root cause, but fundamental issues that we can really make significant shifts and gains in elevating all of our students up, whether it be new curriculum, whether it be better training strategies in reading and math. I think that's the heart of where we need to go. I appreciate the content and ideas that were submitted by the committee and other community members, but if we can't have our kids reading right from the beginning, it doesn't set them up to be super successful in middle school or high school.
Dr. Van Zyl?
That's an expectation of all of our kids, and our teaching and learning department works on that as well. And you'll see that data come out, not just because of the A&I plan, but because of what we do as a school district. So that does get broken down as we get our state achievement tests and all that other information that we normally share with you. And I'm looking at Dr. McDonald, and so that'll be something that comes along to you as a board as well. So can be a component of this, but it's also a bigger picture issue for our whole school district.
Director Thompson, those numbers are included in the World's Best Workforce report that comes out later.
That's what I was going to say. When we get the update on the KPIs are all there and the numbers are all there.
The reading and math numbers are included in that.
Yep.
Okay, any further discussion? Director Thompson?
So I recognize that we've missed the deadline on March 15th or March 13th of when this was approved. What is the official deadline that we need to kind of have this buttoned up?
The official deadline from MDE.
March 15th, so ASAP,
Yeah.
as soon as possible.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we have a motion on the floor and a second, and we'll do a roll call vote to approve it.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 No.
Okay. So motion carries. We have 2 noes, 5 yeses. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda would be the 2024-2025 academic calendar. Dr. Emily McDonald.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board, Dr. Van Zyl, and members of the executive cabinet and community. I am absolutely thrilled to be bringing you a calendar already for the 2024-25 school year. I have to say, I have to give a lot of credit to the team that came together, the stakeholder group that came together to work on this calendar. There's always great dialogue, and it definitely takes some time. But I'm sure you won't be surprised to know that we have already had 2 people reach out to the district looking for this calendar as they're trying to make plans for their families.
It's only been 2.
Yeah, that's right. And I would also add that, one of the things that we really value in this district is attendance of our students. We do want our students to be in school, to be with us. We know that those are the best environments for them to be able to learn. And so to encourage that, we are making a commitment moving forward to try to get our calendars out a little bit earlier than we have in the past so that people can plan their vacations and other things, because we know that oftentimes some families do have to bid for vacation time, and that can happen up to 18 months prior to the date. So we will be, you might see us again next year with another 2 years worth. We'll see how that goes. But a shout out to the committee for all their hard work. You do have the calendar in the board packet, so I won't go through it. What I'll say is, you know from our previous conversations that based on the requirements we have from MDE and our contractual obligations to all of our bargaining groups, we don't have a ton of flexibility in terms of when we have our days off and when we have school. So what we generally do is we start with what we call a rollover calendar, where we just roll over the year before, and then we look at where we might want and need to make adjustments to that calendar. The things that I will point out to you in this calendar is that besides that it's a fairly traditional calendar, one of the conversations that we had was we get a lot of feedback from our community around election time. Specifically around general election time, because we have so many people that turn out and to vote, which is amazing, and we want to encourage that. But we utilize our buildings for that, and we don't have a mechanism in place to fully secure those buildings and be a polling place at the same time. So we've heard from staff internally as well as community members over the years about trying to figure out a way to make those buildings available for voting and make sure that we have a secure situation for our students. So we were actually able to figure out in this calendar how to not hold school for teachers nor for students on the general election day. So our buildings will be open for voting purposes, and then we don't have to be concerned about potential security implications. So that I think is really good news. I think our community and our staff will be happy to hear that. So that was some good discussion. Other than that, we have our traditional 2 days for our EM conventions in October. We did manage to get the Wednesday before Thanksgiving off, which is really a popular day for our staff. We've had staff in for the past couple of years, but they're actually not be in that day either. So we know people drive and go places, so that's great. In December, we have basically the 23rd through the 1st off, which is our standard winter break time. We have a couple of days off in January and February, mostly related to holidays. One of those is Martin Luther King Day. The other one is President's Day. Those are contractual obligations we have with various bargaining groups, so those have to be days off. So we have those in there. Spring break it starts the 31st of March and goes through March 4th. That week also, I believe, is Eid, so that day will be off for students and staff as well. And then we end the school year the second week of June. That's about as late as we like to go in terms of ending the school year. Mainly that's related to where the winter break fell and how many days we have there, because staff and students will be in on the 20th, but then we have the weekend, and then we have those 5, 6, 7 days off. So other than that, no big changes in terms of days off or other things that we're doing. The 2 late starts do remain in the calendar. We had good discussion around whether or not to remove those. But right now, some of our buildings are utilizing those for conferences, and so we want to continue to provide that opportunity twice a year, once in the fall and then once again in the spring. So I'm happy to stand for questions or comments.
Any questions from the board? Director Thompson?
Thank you for this. While I appreciate having spring break the first week of April, can you share with me and the community kind of why spring break is now further into early into April versus later in March, whether it be logistics or not logistics? Just curious, because I know our community has sent some emails and it'd be good to just provide some transparency around on that particular week.
Certainly. So we have flexibility around when we identify spring break. What's happened in the past is that we have a contractual day off for many groups the Friday before Easter. As a result of that, we have historically paired spring break with that day off for staff so that we didn't have to take another day off later. So it has bounced around a little bit. Part of the consideration is that and the number of days that we can actually have kids in school and whether or not we can shift that. The second, we always try to look at when breaks are, like when's the end of the third quarter or when are sports and activities happening, because we try to be as accommodating as we can. It doesn't always work based on how the calendar falls, but those are other things we look at related to spring break. But there's no there's no directive by the state. Actually, there's no directive to even have a spring break at all. We just we try to fit it in the best place we can, given the parameters of the calendar in terms of days and hours.
You would be
Director
very
Shinley?
brave to take away spring break.
Director Shinley.
This is kind of just for me. I've always had this question, I guess. So conferences are early in the year. Is there a purpose why we have it so early? I'm not questioning. I'm just curious to know. We just start school, and I'm just curious to know why it's so early in October.
One of the reasons why they sort of hit around the mid-quarter at the beginning of the year is really because it started as a way of sort of making sure that people were informed how students were doing in terms of progress early on, because it gives us an opportunity then to do some earlier intervention. What we don't want to see happen is we don't want a student to not be successful and report that after the fact, right? So the earlier, and I know it's a bit of a balance, because I remember, I taught high school, so I had 200 kids, and you're just sort of getting into the groove and getting to know them. And it is challenging that quickly to be able to speak to it. Right. But I think at the same time, from an instructional standpoint, it's actually helpful, because you get the time to take a pause, to look at your students and say, okay, where are we collectively and where are we individually? And then to reach out to parents and families and say, hey, we're just getting going. We have time. Let's figure out how we can do better or solve this issue that we're experiencing. So that's really where it came out of. I'd also add to that pre-COVID, we didn't do any virtual. There wasn't the virtual opportunities that we have now, and so that was another reason we had to get families to come actually physically in the building. It was more difficult to get a hold of families for a lot of reasons. So I think technology's helped us in that way, because we have ability to communicate more frequently over time. But I think it's nice to have that little pause moment before we get too far down the track.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Director Carly Anderson.
I've asked you about this, so I just want to also just bring this to you to be able to talk about with our community. Going forward, can we consider other kinds of holidays? I know some districts are considering Ramadan or Rosh Hashanah. And I think about that from a lens of, when we have a major holiday where kids have off, they often do like an educational piece around it. So Martin Luther King Day or something like that. So I know that we have restrictions and contractual things, and I appreciate Eid being brought up, Easter, but are there ways that we can maybe as a district be thinking about other holidays as well?
Yes, there have been a number of districts not a number, a couple too, that I'm aware of in the news recently related to this in particular. One of the things that we do provide as part of our calendar committee documentation are a list of the primary holidays and their dates. So we don't go into the calendar process totally void of information related to when those things are occurring. And we have made some modifications over the years for different reasons around different types of holidays. Obviously, the challenge is the calendar, the challenge is the number of days, the challenge is which holidays, right? And so moving forward, we need to have more conversation and dialogue about if we're going to commit to not having school on a variety of different holidays, what would those be? What's our rationale for doing that? How does it relate to our student population and their needs and their families? And then we would have to build those in on the front end of the calendar, sort of like we do with contractual days, and then see how we can get our days and our hours in to do that. So we've tried to do a better job, certainly over the years, of having more awareness. Now, I know awareness doesn't necessarily equate to action, but we're moving in a direction of just trying to be cognizant of when those holidays happen. And in some cases, they align with stuff that we're doing, or we can make a decision around that to align it with something we're doing. So, yeah, we have some work to do there, but I would say the dialogue is definitely better, and we're trying to do a better job.
Dr. McDonald, if there is a family that needs to take time off for one of those holidays, are those considered excused absences for
Absolutely,
students?
yes. Families are allowed to be out of school for that reason, to celebrate their holidays. The students should be held harmless for that, and there shouldn't be any expectations related to them doing things while they're on their holiday. So yes, we may absolutely make accommodations for those situations when we do have school. So thank you for that.
Yep. Any other questions from board members? Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the academic calendar for 2024-2025?
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion by Director David Anderson. Do we have a second?
A second.
Second by Director Shinley. Any other further discussion? Okay. Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Yes.
Brian Thompson?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
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 Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 24 budget forecast. Bill Holmgren.
Hello again. Let's see if I can quickly find.
You might want to move that microphone up. You're a little bit taller. Sorry.
Okay. What we want to do tonight is just give you an idea of what we think is happening with the legislature and how that's going to affect our budget. So we'll talk about the state legislation that we know is out there. Then we'll talk about the budget assumptions from that going into next year's budget. And then we'll talk about a forecast. We'll show some different variables and how that looks when it comes to our fund balance. And then I'm just briefly at the end, I want to talk a little bit about this year's budget, because some of the changes, it's really only one change, that we did during the cutting process, that we need to make some adjustments in that budget. So I need you to approve that. So, state. Now, what's going in the conference committee right now? It looks like we're looking at a 4% increase on the first year of the biennium and a 2% in the second. Now, this is actually a big deal, because we usually only get 2% on a regular basis. 10 years ago, maybe a little over 10 years now, we actually had a couple of years we had 0 when there were some tough times with the state of Minnesota. So the 4% is a big deal. That's something that we don't usually see. Now, the big thing, of course, is them looking at the special ed cross subsidy and actually doing something about it. Now, of course, this isn't passed, but it is going in the conference committee. It's all there. So you can see that actually generates us $6 million.
It still doesn't cover our costs, though.
Oh, no. This, like I say, that 47.3%, what that's talking about is 47.3% of our cross subsidy. So we're still short the 52.7%.
Yep.
But that is a big increase, right?
Oh, this is a
I
big
know,
deal.
I get it, but
I
I just
wasn't
want to
arguing
make
with you,
sure
but I
that
just want people to know
everybody
it's a-
understands it
Yeah.
doesn't even hit 50% of our cost.
Yeah, and we spend about 15 million extra, not extra, but out of our general fund for that, correct? To cover the special
Cost
ed
subsidy.
costs.
Correct. It's right at $15 million, but that is
Yeah,
correct.
and so 6 million means that we still pay 9.
Correct. So anyway, this is good news. I mean, it's the first time we've seen anything like this since I've been working in schools. So I think this is probably a one and done, but we'll see as things go along. Now, ELL, they're looking at some increases there. This does not generate very many dollars for us. It is an increase, about $18,000. There's a student support personnel where they want to encourage school districts to hire more counselors and social workers. The kicker here is we're eligible for $133,000. But for every $1 we spend of this, we have to add 3 of our own. So in order to do this, it costs us $400,000. So I just want you to be aware. And this is pretty common when it comes to the state of Minnesota. You know, they're giving out on one side, on the other side, not so much. Unemployment, this is really going to hit the school districts very, very hard. The legislature is looking at paying unemployment for hourly employees that do not work in the summertime. And they're looking at that liability to fall 100% on the school district, not funded. So this is an unfunded mandate going into conference committee right now, and we're looking at $3.5 million. So yes, on one side, they're giving us $6 million, which we're very excited about that, but then on the other side, they're taking 3.5, which is over 50% right there. So it's very frustrating, very difficult. But we're watching it very closely. If you have time to call your legislature, now's a good time, okay? Paid family leave is another situation where they want to make sure that employees have paid family leave. Now, we give a lot of sick time and things for our employees, but sometimes when they have a particular leave they need to take, they don't have 12 weeks of sick time in order to do that. So what this turns into, it's a new cost to our payrolls that we have to pay on every single dollar. So every dollar that we pay in, we have to pay that 0.007%. So, and our salaries we pay is about $100 million. So that's $700,000. So there's another hit to the increases that we have. One more thing that's a little exciting, sort of, because we talked about it for so many years, was asked the legislature if a school board can vote and replace a existing operating levy by vote instead of going out and spending the money on an election. So that is actually still in the legislation going to conference committee. So, and just a reminder, we'll talk about it here in a minute again, but this is something that the board's got to look at, because if we don't renew this, we lose another $3.4 million. So some big dollars that we're talking about here. So that's the good news, the bad news. So taking that into consideration, putting together a forecast, or a budget forecast, what I built into this forecast, of course, is 4% of our formula allowance on the first year, 2% years in the future. Enrollment growth, continuing to put in 2%, a little conservative here. We're running a little higher than 2%, but I don't want to ever bring you a budget that's going to look like it's better than it really is. Operating levies, we've been getting about a 2% on our inflation factor that's in those operating levies, so that's 2% in each year. We continue, again, the 250 students we usually see, we also get, our operating levies are tied to that. So it's about $400,000 that will increase us on a yearly basis as enrollment is right now. Now, I take into consideration the budget adjustments on the revenue side. If you remember, part of the sale and part of the new revenues we have is about $900,000. Of course, that doesn't continue on. The cross subsidies put in at the $6 million with a 2% increase from that way going forward. Special ed funding. Again, we use a 4% piece there. There's a 4% cap on special ed funding increases on a yearly basis, and we're over the cap, so we usually get the full 4%. So that's built into there. When we move over to the expenditure side, of course, we've taken into consideration for the $6 million we did do in cuts. That's put in there in the first year. And then we've increased 2% of our staffing. That is for the new students that we're getting on a yearly basis, at about 2%. So of course, we need to hire about 2% more staffing on a yearly basis to cover those new students. Of course, we're assuming that staff increases will match the state increases. So that's put in at 4.2 on through. As we talked earlier tonight, our benefit inflation's runs a little higher than 2%. For our health insurance all by itself is 5%. Now we do split that, but when you look at the actual cost of the health insurance for the district, it runs a little over 3%. Looking at 2% for our supplies and equipment, utilities are doing a lot, are come down from where we were. And that huge inflation piece over here the last 18 months, but using a 3% factor. And then transportation, we just talked about transportation tonight. I did put 4% just to be safe. I don't want to, again, we want to be conservative and not look like we have more than we really have. So taking all that into consideration, we put together a forecast. Now what I've done here is I put 2 gray lines. Those are our fund balance policy at 5%. And as we've talked over the last few months, our fund balance policy really should be higher. So I put one in at 10% just so you can see where that's at. And of course, and if we don't have any new revenue, we just get the 4 and 2. That is this blue line. So we have taken care of our budget fund balance falling, but you can see how it starts to fall again because we have some things that cost more than 2%. So that kind of drags on, and we're just kind of sitting there around 0. When we look at taking into consideration the special ed dollars, now that's a big number. And it puts us in a pretty good position when you look out 5 years. We can maybe talk about a 10%. But as I said, that's not probably all available to us depending on what happens. So when we look at that unemployment piece, which is very large, it pulls that way down. Of course, we're going to get it back above 5% with this done. But hitting that 10% is not necessarily likely without some other changes. The other thing I want to talk about, of course, is that we need to call for an election operating levy renewal. We certainly can discuss if we get an opportunity from the state legislature to renew it without an election. But if we don't go out and pass that, see, we're dropping again that $3.4 million. So now we're just kind of barely above 5%. But lastly, I do want to remind everybody that we need funding for our new school when it comes to staffing, and that's about a $1.3 million effect. So looking forward over the next 5 years with the pieces that we see from the state legislature and the costs that we have coming, it is positive. I'm going to say it's positive as a whole because our fund balances looks like it'll be growing, depending on what other programming we talk about over the next few years. So this only gives you a slight picture of what we're looking at. I can't be very specific until I know what the state is going to do. I certainly want to bring forward a 24 budget to you in May, so we have a good time to look at it before we need to approve it in June. So is there any questions on any of that?
Do we have any questions from the board on that?
Okay, next I just want a couple of small reminders again as we go through the budgeting process over the next few years. Again, we talked about this. Just in 25, we need to staff the new elementary school at $1.3 million. We have a new program, an MTSS program that started with grant money over the last couple of years. And this is something that the grant will end. So if there's something we want to keep, this is not a huge number, 200,000, but that's something that you'll have to be built in if we want to keep that going forward. And then again, the operating levy, to renew that, if we don't get permission to, vote on it, we will need election this fall to keep the money the same. The good news about that, it doesn't affect our taxpayers. They're already paying this now, so there's no increase to their tax with a renewal of an operating levy. Okay, I want to just quickly show how that staff development reclassification, we talked about the $1.9 million and how this affects in the fiscal year 23 right now. I try to point out this gets kind of busy. This is a page out of our budget book. But I want to point out that in elementary and secondary education, you see that came down $1.9 million, down to $77.6 million. And we're seeing that same $1.9 million added to the instructional support services. And that's an area we've had a lot of questions about why is it getting so high. Well, this is a good example. That's staff development dollars, and that's where it sits on the line. So that now is up to 26.7. So that's the change. If you go read through the budget book, those are the two numbers that changed, along with our fund balance number, of course. And here you see that our unassigned fund balance now, instead of being $211,000, it's at $2.1 million. So these are the small changes that I want to put in place for fiscal year 23, and I need you to take action on that for me to go ahead and make those changes. And that's all I have for you tonight.
Do any questions from the board on those changes? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the fiscal year revised?
So moved.
Sorry. The revised fiscal year 23 budget? We have a motion by Director Thompson,
I'll second.
second by Director David Anderson. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Yes.
Wait for the roll call vote, please.
Yes.
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 Director Thompson?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion carries 7-0. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have no additions to the agenda today, so we'll move right into the superintendent's report.
Just a couple of items, and we'll move fairly quickly through this. Just a reminder that our state testing is taking place, and so hopefully staff, students, and families are aware of that, because having kids show up for those tests are vitally important for us to be able to have that take place. Bill touched base on the legislation. Those are not the only components of legislation that are out there. You've gotten updates from MSBA and AMSD. If you haven't reached out to our legislators, please do that, because there are some other items that do impact us financially and in regards to negotiations and other things that are written into some of those bills. So please make sure you've touched base with them. It's hard to believe the end of the year is not that far away. But I would like to emphasize the importance of not only showing up for testing, but showing up in general. That's for our students and staff. You know, when we take a look at our calendars, and I know people are taking a look at when holidays and things like that fall, it is vitally important for our students to be here, because they miss out on so much if they're not in the classroom with our staff. Because our teachers do a great job, and the discussions that take place within those classrooms, you can't replicate when you're gone for a week or 2 weeks at a time and just being asked to do makeup work. So please make sure that we do a push on that. And then also, if you aren't aware, I know our staff is aware, our HR department has done a fantastic job of getting the staffing, is it chart? Is that what we call it out? Staffing grid out for our folks to be able to take a look at. So appreciate our HR department and folks doing that, so our staff has the ability to take a look at what's there, and that's also because of the work that you did as a board to be able to get our budget reductions in place and be able to move forward. So that's all I have, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions from the board? All right. Having completed all the items on the agenda, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion.
A motion by Director David Anderson. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Director Carly Anderson. Any discussion on that? All right. Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote.
Yes.
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 Director Thompson?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This meeting is officially adjourned. Have a good evening.
Big shout out.